Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. I'm delighted to be joined by British Rowing CEO Andy Parkinson, Chair of the Sport Committee Nick Hubble, and Head of Community Development at British Rowing Paul Lorenzato. Tonight we're going to be talking about the latest COVID guidance from British Rowing, especially in relation to the current lockdown restrictions, and also talking a little bit about what we think might come next after the end of that lockdown. We've had a number of questions through in advance, but please do pop any extra ones you've got into the questions panel. We'll try and get through as many as we can. We've only got an hour, but so we may well group some, particularly the ones that came in advance. And if we aren't able to answer your question tonight, we'll make sure we give you some instructions on how to get your question answered. Cool. So Andy, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. It feels like a really long time since the end of the first lockdown. And actually, the whole rowing family really came together and did a great job of getting us back to the position where we actually had a few competitions get going again. When we were going through the local restrictions, organised sport felt like it was fairly sheltered, I think it's fair to say, from those restrictions. And then we were, because of that, I think we were all half expecting it to be a little bit of a lockdown light, so to speak. But it seems that that's not really the case.
Yeah, that's right, Rich, and evening all. Thanks for joining us tonight. I was just trying to think back to when we did the first one of these, which I guess must have been, what, June, July, something like that? Rich, you would probably remember. But it does feel like an eternity. Yeah, I think you're right. And I mean, if I cast my mind back to the sort of announcement or the process by which the government got to this lockdown, I think I was hoping, or probably hoping more than expecting, that it would be more of a lockdown light than a second lockdown. And I think on that weekend, so what was that, 10 days ago, we were hoping that sport would be able to take, at least people would be able to get out on the water. It became clear through the Monday that wasn't going to be the case, and we had a conference call with a whole bunch of CEOs from other sports, Sport England, UK Sport, Sport and Recreation Alliance, and we got, I guess, a briefing on what we anticipated coming out of the government's position going into that Wednesday Parliament. I mean, the way it works for us is the same as it works for the club members, to be honest, is we hear some news on the media. We understand that there's going to be some legislation passed. We watch, we try and understand what we think the impact's going to be. We try and work out what we know to be true, and then we sit and wait. We talk to our partners, Sport England, UK Sports. I was speaking to sailing and canoeing because we've got like-minded environments, if you like. And then we watch on Wednesday to see what happens. So as the members will have seen, we put out a statement on the Tuesday that suggested what we thought was going to happen, and then put something out on the Thursday once we'd really worked it out. And look, I've had a number of queries and questions from people saying, are we taking legal advice? What are we doing about, I guess, pushing back on government on the lockdown? And the simple answer to that is, firstly, at the COVID group, we reaffirmed the fact that our priority was the public health agenda, and that we would comply with what the government was asking us to do. The second thing is we are taking our advice from Sport England and UK Sports, because they are the arm's length body that report into the DCMS, and the DCMS is the one who's trying to interpret what's essentially coming out of number 10. And we have expressed concerns on a number of areas, and we've got reasonable answers back. We don't know why that's happening back. We've got a whole variety of answers back. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is operate within the ecosystem of sport, apply the rules of government in an appropriate way that protects the public health, and also gives us the chance to get back out on the water as quickly as we can. So that's the process. I think it's also worth highlighting that there's three elements to the guidance that are specific to us, and have caused some contention. The first one is in the club facilities, so the fact that all of the club has to shut. So that's from the entrance to the car park all the way through to the boat bays. And I appreciate that's pretty hard for clubs. I really do. And I know Paul and his team have been fielding tons of inquiries, but look, that's the way we're interpreting it. And that's the way we think that clubs can operate safely in a COVID environment. The second area is schools versus juniors. And there's no doubt there's some inconsistencies and confusion around the schools. I mean, I was on the Tideway today actually and saw a couple of schools going out, and it does feel a little bit odd that the schools can go out but the clubs along the Tideway are all locked up and shut. Look, that is just, I'm afraid, that's the deal. The government is saying that schools can be open, and I think a lot of us are benefiting from that, let's face it. They're saying that curricular and a certain level of extracurricular activity can take place. And if schools have got the capability to operate in a COVID secure environment within their school setup, then look, we want kids out there rowing, we certainly do. But that I can understand as being quite frustrating when you're seeing school kids going past you when you're walking along the towpath rather than rowing on the water. And I guess the third one, which is worth noting, is that there is one single dispensation from government, and that relates to elite training centres. So our national team, it continues to train out at Longridge, Caversham, and also at Bisham on their land training. And we've had a number of inquiries from, I guess, clubs who want to be seen to be fit into that elite training centre definition. And we've been very clear, and UK Sport's been very clear with us as well, that that definition is tight. And that the whole performance system is benefiting from everyone complying with that. So I guess those are the three things that have been probably top of our mind as we've walked through the last 10 days and tried to field inquiries from clubs.
And Andy, on that, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that the requirements for the GB rowing team to continue operating are extremely onerous as well. So there's a lot of things they're having to do.
That's right, and I mean, you know, look, we put an awful lot of time and energy into getting that site COVID secure. We can't have everyone on the same site. We've got to do temperature tests in the morning. We've got to do a whole ton of stuff. So it's not like we just get dispensation and off we go. We have to reach a higher standard to achieve that dispensation.
Cool, thanks, Andy. And Nick, coming to you next. Last time when we came out of lockdown, there were a lot more unknowns about COVID, and we worked through a very sort of careful step-by-step process to go from lockdown back to, in the end, competitions. How do you see that working this time round when we come out of lockdown?
Well, I think the government seemed to be indicating that we're going to return to a local COVID alert level at the end of this lockdown. So this hopefully means that won't need to take quite as elongated process of getting back out there. We're working on updating our guidance now so that it's clear what's possible at each of the three tiers that the government were previously operating in. That's what we think is going to happen. The exact process will depend on what government advice comes out somewhere around the 2nd of December, I'm guessing, but we're working as fast as we can.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that a little bit more later on during this webinar as well. And Paul, many people probably have spoken to you without even realising over the last few months, because you and your team are right at the coalface in terms of sporting clubs, and giving those answers. Whenever you email club sport at, is one of Paul or his team. How do you feel clubs are coping with this new second lockdown?
I think the second lockdown has been a bit harder, in the sense that the water is still open, where the first lockdown everything was shut, so there was no water access or whatever. And of course there is this tantalizing piece of water that we can't get access to because your boats are inside a boathouse or they're in a compound or whatever. So I can understand the club's frustrations, I really can. I'm a volunteer in the club as well, and I'd love to be out there coaching and getting people out there. So I do understand it. Our advice is no different to any of the other water sports. Canoeing is the same advice on their website. The RYA has the same advice on their website, and they've got massive compounds where boats are left outside and they won't let people access those. They won't let other clubs that use their facilities, because that's the decision that they've taken. So it is a bit frustrating that if somebody had shut the water down, then we wouldn't be having a lot of these conversations. But that's the way it is. But all I would say is that clubs are doing a tremendous job in dealing with going from one bit to another. If you were up in the northeast and or the northwest or wherever, you didn't know what you were doing from one moment to the next. And clubs have coped really, really, really well with it. It's just, they should be tremendously proud of everything that they've done. First of all, to get back into the clubs, to go COVID secure, and then have to take that horrible decision to shut the clubs again.
Yeah, I think there's volunteers right up and down the country have done a fantastic job this year. And Andy, perhaps that's a good sort of segue to give you an opportunity to just talk about some of the things that British Rowing are doing to try and make sure we're here to offer support.
Yeah, I can do, but let me touch on a couple of things that Paul and Nick said, because I mean, Nick, you smiled when you said, you know, we're going to wait until the 2nd of December to find out what happens next, and you know, that is basically what we are going to do. You know, we try and have a crystal ball, but in the same way that people are having chats on the towpath, or only one-to-one, by the way, and also that they're having chats at home about what's going to happen next. Look, we're in the same position. We're not getting any heads up about what's happening. I mean, I do get a sense that this lockdown we're in isn't going to be the only one of the winter, and we need to gear ourselves up for that, vaccine or no vaccine. And you know, probably realistically we're not through this until the summer, but that is just a guess, to be honest. And the other thing I would say is, you know, in reference to what Paul said, I think this second lockdown has just made people so flat, because you know, everyone did work really hard to get up and running. You know, we had the test event, the competition in Newcastle, which was well received. We had a couple of events that were up and running, and it kind of felt that we had a bit of confidence, a bit about being on the water, and a bit of confidence about opening the clubs. And now we're sort of back into this rather gloomy environment. So I understand how people are feeling, and look, all I can reassure people is that we're doing everything we can through, you know, trying to influence the powers that be, that sport is a really key part of society and rowing is a key part of sport. So I guess that's the first thing that we're doing. We're trying to influence as much as we possibly can. You've mentioned Paul's team, and look, hats off to them. They've been brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I'd say the same thing about Nick's group and about Kate O'Sullivan and the regional chairs. You know, everyone's pulled together. Everyone's trying to answer the questions that everyone's putting to them as best we possibly can. And look, we'll continue to do that with the support of Sport England and with the support of our partners as well. What other practical things have we done? We've extended the club emergency fund through to, or Rich, you're going to have to remind me on that, but I think it's basically through to cover the second lockdown. So I think we've extended it through to the 1st of February for applications. So look, if your clubs are struggling financially, have a look at that. It's on the website. Look, any application will be considered. That's all I can say. For competition organisers, we've rolled over the affiliation fees. So essentially, you know, you get a pass on this year because you haven't been able to run competitions. And look, we're trying to innovate. We're trying to adapt. We're trying to put relevant content on the British Rowing website. We're trying to put relevant virtual indoor stuff out there for you. We're trying to activate across the social media platforms and give you some taste of rowing, if that's what you want during the lockdown. So that's what we're really trying to do, trying to keep staying engaged and keep everyone positive, to be honest.
Cool. And Paul, your team's also happy to help clubs if they're looking to apply for funding that's not from British Rowing as well. So the Sport England funds. There's
the new Sport England fund there that is there's £16.5 million there for sports clubs to help them through coronavirus, you know, problems and stuff like that. So really go and have a look at them. I've heard of one club that's already looking at it in a sense of they're looking at it for air conditioning for their gym and see if they can use it to create, you know, create a sterile, you know, a better environment in their gym, make it more COVIDly secure, going through that way. Now, there's endless possibilities, but there was one that I heard that I thought, no, that's clever. I like that. That's almost thinking outside the box.
Cool. Yeah, no, there's a lot of good thinking out there in the clubs, isn't there?
Yeah.
So Nick mentioned it earlier, and so just before we move on to more of the questions, it just seems like an opportune time just to introduce a little bit about how the guidance is going to look going forward. So hopefully I'll just get these a slide up. So most of you will probably be familiar with this set of phasing that we had in our original return to rowing guidance, and it was very linear, going from lockdown through to getting competitions back up and running in phase H. I think before lockdown it became quite apparent, even just with the local restrictions, that the way the government was setting rules was going to work slightly differently, and so different parts of the sport would need to move at potentially different speeds. So what we have started to look at is looking at how we can build levels which do still reflect that move from no activity to pre-pandemic activity, with bits in the middle around restricted activity, implementation of full COVID secure guidance, and then in the middle something with restrictions on that COVID secure guidance. But what we can do there is also apply it across 5 different areas, and split it up so that we can dial up and dial down different areas of the sport as required by the restrictions. So just because we need to change something about crew boat rowing doesn't mean that we need to necessarily change something about competition or vice versa. So we split it into the 5 areas of club sporting facilities, hospitality facilities, on-water activity, indoor club activity, so essentially indoor training, and competition. And what that allows us to do, and obviously you'll see this in more detail when we release the final guidance, but for each of these areas, we can then create an appropriate scale that can slide up and down from the bottom here, where we've got essentially no activity, through to your normal activity at the top. And the really great thing for us about that going forward is it allows us to take the local COVID alert levels and think about how those apply to this framework and give different guidance for the different tiers. So, for example, your medium might sit like this, where the yellow is highlighting it, and your high might sit like red, like this. And actually, the way this will then be presented within the guidance will allow us to really be specific about what the specific limitations are in each area. So, for example, here we have a medium risk example. Clearly, this is pre-lockdown, so it could change. So club sporting facilities able to open in a COVID secure way, but you need to be thinking about rule of 6 and changing rooms and showers for essential use only. Hospitality, again, able to open in a COVID secure way, but actually still rule of 6, table service only, and hospitality facilities must close by 10 p.m. And yet our other areas of sport can be at a different level. So here, rowing level 2, where it allows the full implementation of the COVID secure protocols. So you essentially can have crew boats, affiliated competitions, and you can be training indoors. And that can be then applied across the other levels. I won't go through these in complete detail because the government are likely to change them. But for example, then our very high risk example from pre-lockdown, you can see suddenly there's a lot more restrictions there. But hopefully this will help give the rowing community a lot more clarity. And what we'll then also do is just rejig the document a little bit. And so this is an outline of the content. And you can see in the middle here, these COVID secure sporting facilities, COVID secure hospitality facilities, and so on, down to COVID secure competition, all relate specifically to those areas of the sport we've highlighted in the framework. So that way it'll be really clear within both the overview and the detailed guidance exactly how these things link up. And the aim is to try and release that towards probably the back end of next week. And clearly then we'll just keep updating it as the government provides more information about what post-lockdown looks like. So that gives you a bit of an idea of where things are going. So we'll move on to try and cover off as many of the questions that we had in advance now as possible. Paul, one of the questions that we had quite a lot of people asking was around canoeing in particular, and there's a number of kayakers and canoers out on the river. Can you just sort of clarify for us here what the BCU's actual, well, it's probably not our place to give the BCU's advice, but what your understanding of their advice is and why we might be seeing a slight difference between canoeing and rowing?
Yeah, I've actually spoken to my opposite number in the BCU, or British Canoeing, and on their website, their advice to clubs is exactly the same as ours. There is no ambiguity between it. It even says all club facilities should shut. So it's there. The RYA are very much the same. Theirs is there are some certain things that they can do in the sense that you can go out to your boat if it needs emergency repairs or maintenance or whatever. But other than that, the same message is being given to all three sports: is you must shut. Now, I can't turn around and say that canoeing are wrong, or whatever. Their advice to their clubs is correct. It's up to canoeing to manage their clubs. All I would say is that, and this isn't meant as a threat or anything to anybody, but it's just so you know, there are fines, and there are fines, substantial fines. I think the first incident is £200, and then it just doubles continuously from there for every time. So all I would say is that the advice for all three sports is the same.
Yeah, and Paul, I think, I mean, look, your experience of talking to your counterparts and mine the same, is that in actual fact, the message that was passed down through DCMS on Monday, I guess it was Monday last week, was absolutely clear. It was basically everything shutting. And Paul, you made a point earlier on about the waterways, which I think is worth picking up, because I had to be reminded that in lockdown 1, the waterways themselves, so the Canal and River Trust, the EA and the PLA, shut the waterways because they didn't want I guess accidents on the waterways diverting emergency resources away from there. And look, they haven't done that now this time, which is good, but that does create a little bit of confusion for people because people are naturally out on the water. So I mean, look, I'm on a variety of CEO WhatsApp groups, and look, there's tons of chat, but it's all extremely consistent chat, because I think most of the sports, whether they're members or clubs, have been consistently applying it, is a different matter. But the advice that sports are giving out, I think, is largely consistent, which is, look, we have to shut.
Yeah.
And is it fair to say as well that in canoeing in particular, you're more likely to have a private boat that's kept in your garage or on top of your car, and so there will be people going out in that way?
I think there is that, definitely, is that I would never get the terminology right. Your canoe or your kayak is a lot smaller than a single in most cases, so you can have it in your back garden, put it on your roof a lot easier, go down to the public car park and, close to the river, and jump in the river. That's always going to be easier. Yeah. in your kayak or your canoe, yeah, but that's always going to be the case. Unfortunately, our craft aren't that mobile, if you like, or easy to maneuver around.
And we've just had a question come in on this, Paul. I think you're probably the best place to answer it. Can you just sum up your understanding of where we are with waterways authorities in terms of their advice?
At the moment, all the waterways are open for recreational use. The Canals and River Trust and the EA have turned around and said that you are to limit, and this is for boaters, so the people who live on the rivers and all the rest of it, that realistically they want no non-essential travel, but it is open to recreation. The PLA are the same. They have not closed the Thames below Teddington, but again, they've put out a point saying, if you're going to go out, make sure you know what you're doing, all the rest of it, because there's going to be less patrols around and things like that. And that's the same with the EA and the CRT as well. I know that there are some private waterways that are still that may be closed, but they are not come under the control of those three.
But the key advice probably remains always check with your local navigation authority. Yeah. So moving on to the more positive side of coming out the other side of lockdown, Nick, you've already talked a little bit about it. How do you see that playing out specifically around crew boats? Was one of the questions we had.
I think what I'm about to say, I'll caveat with what we've said before about we'll find out what we can actually do around the 2nd of December. But I think if we make a little bit of an assumption that we're going to come out to what were the pre-existing tiers, and I think then we assume that we go back to larger group sizes in general public, so maybe the rule of 6. I think that we can be fairly confident, I think, that sport will be allowed to operate, or domestic sport will be allowed to operate again. And hopefully it will be allowed to operate again under the previously DCMS supported guidance that was put out there. So for us, I'd like to think that we're going back to at least the rule of 12 for group sizes for organised sport. So in that case, crew boating should be able to happen. But as I say, it's a big should based on where we come out of this on the other side.
Yeah, Nick, I think you're right on that, and certainly the sort of more recent conversations I've had with people sort of connected with DCMS and others is that sport is really trying to, I wouldn't say lobby, but really put forward its case that the case is we did it before coming out of lockdown 1, and we did it really responsibly, and it worked, and sport actually wasn't an area where you saw big peaks in COVID cases. So I think we've got evidence that the sports sector generally, and also rowing specifically, did a really good job of that. And that's what I'm trying to say to those who are at least a bit closer to the decision making than some, is to say, look, we can do this, so please let us do it, because our clubs are desperate to get back out there. That's the message I'm trying to get across.
Cool. I think we've all got our fingers crossed about that. And Nick, if we just take the assumption that we are able to go back to crews, and we kind of base this a little bit on what it would have been pre-lockdown. We had a question about crew bubbles and how rigid these should be, and specifically whether people can move between different crews and how large these bubbles should be, and so on. Got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's quite a difficult one because all clubs vary in how they're able to operate or how they traditionally have operated. Some are operating a squad system. Some are just fortunate enough to have just enough people to get a boat out. I think that a lot of clubs, before we went into lockdown, were operating sort of crew sizes plus a couple of people maybe, so that when somebody couldn't make it on a Wednesday night, then they'd actually got a sub to go in. But I think they were all being pretty good with those group sizes, trying to keep them to a minimum. And I think that is what our message is. I said the more subs you put into a bubble or a crew group, the greater the probability of an incident happening. So we'd always say keep them to a minimum, keep them the same wherever you can. If you do need to change, our guidance is you need to do it sensibly. You can't jump from one group on a Monday into another group on a Tuesday. You probably need to go through a quarantine period to make sure that your mates, your club members, are as safe as they possibly can. And ultimately, it's about keeping good records at the clubs, because that is still a requirement, or we're assuming that's still going to be a requirement, to keep records of who's been where for test and trace.
Yeah. And I guess to a certain extent, Paul, if it's about minimising, like fundamentally, the more people you're mixing with, the more chance, if there is a positive test in that group, the more chance you're going to be picked up by NHS test and trace as well. I think you've dealt with a few clubs like that.
Yeah, I've dealt with a few clubs with that way, and unfortunately, I've dealt with a few people that have subbed into a boat to do somebody a favour, and somebody has tested positive in the boat, and test and trace have turned around and said, right, you have to self-isolate. And that it is what I would say to people is, don't be pressurized into moving from one group to another. Remember, we're all trying to look after each other here. You know, your own safety as well as your family's safety, you know, before your rowing family. It's a hard thing to say because we all love what we do, but you've got to think about it in that respect.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul. And just moving away from crew boat rowing for a minute, Andy, we've had questions in around adaptive rowing and why we haven't specifically mentioned this in the COVID guidance. Can you just explain for everybody why that is?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few groups that we haven't specifically mentioned in the COVID guidance, and I think that the way we've looked at this is we've tried to have an overarching set of guidance that can be applied locally and individually. And a lot of the conversations we've had over the last few months are, okay, can we give answers to people on everything that's going on? And the simple answer is no, we can't. We haven't identified any specific COVID-related requirements or guidance for athletes with a disability or adaptive rowers out there, other than the normal stuff, which is, hey, assess the risk of what's going on, and make sure that you're being catered for in an appropriate way. So we didn't actually feel there was a need for it. That said, if the question thinks that we should do, we can certainly pick that up again at the next meeting and have a conversation about it. We're trying to evolve. It's an iterative process, and we're trying to populate our guidance with answers to questions that we've got coming in, so that basically Paul doesn't have to answer every single question from the entire rowing community on a day-to-day basis. Something like that, eh, Paul?
Something like that, yeah. But the adaptive thing, as Andy's just said, it's about the risk assessment. And I've spoken to some adaptive athletes, and they have chosen not to go back to rowing yet because they don't feel comfortable. But I've also had conversation with clubs about how they can put adaptive people back into the water and be COVIDly secure and put things into place. So it goes back to something that we said before. If you could do it before COVID, then how do you do it and be COVID secure? That's all you need to think about.
And I guess it comes down to communication as well, because Nick, I'd say it's probably fair to say that there's people out there who might be just in your general senior squad at a club who could actually be at higher risk from a COVID perspective than potentially an adaptive rower.
Yeah, sure. And I think, you know, what Andy said earlier is we're doing all we can to make it possible for everyone to be able to enjoy our sport. We're not trying to be overly restrictive and put further burdens on clubs than the current legislation already does. But I think if you have got a particular group that are unable to go and row, I think, you know, it's not a club's fault that they can't go out, but similarly, it's not necessarily British Rowing's either. And I think the key here is just to explain to people, the people that can't go out, is, you know, the reasons why, and communicate that with them, because I think if people understand those reasons, they might not like the reasons, but it will help them come to terms with it. And I mean, the other thing to look at is, I think clubs and individuals in the early days were really, really innovative as to what they could either put on as a club or give people ideas of alternative activities to keep levels of fitness up. And there is still our version 8 guidance out there that has stuff in the back of it around that.
Yeah, I should say it's version 7 at the moment. I think we've all looked at so many versions that Nick's lost count. But yeah, there's still the guidance in the back.
Yeah.
Apologies, I feel like we're bouncing around topics a little bit tonight, but that's due to the nature of the questions coming in a little bit. Paul, I've got one for you here around coach
anybody
education.
else going to get a question?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, clearly our coach education program's been a bit disrupted. And I know you've spoken to our colleague Sarah, who deals with that area of our organisation. Can you just talk a little bit about what the plans are to get that back up and running and catch up some of that?
Yeah, Sarah Harris and the coach education team, obviously when we went into lockdown 1, just about decimated any coaching course that was already was running. So we had people in different stages of their course. Courses were then cancelled as it cascaded out that lockdown went on and we still couldn't do face-to-face and everything else. So what the education and training team have done is they've now contacted all the people that were mid-course and have been piloting online to try and finish the non-face-to-face part, the classroom part of the process. And they're now also contacting the learners to arrange face-to-face assessments. So they're now starting to catch up with those people that were there. And anybody, this is a message from Sarah and her team, is that anybody who knows of or needs an assessment or whatever, go to the website. There's a link there to contact Pippa Harrison and arrange an assessment. In fairness to Sarah and her team, also they've been dealing with having a review of their coaching qualifications as well during this time. So it has been a huge task for them, but they are working through those backlog of assessments and also looking at how they can now deliver new courses with the minimum amount of classroom content or bringing people together. But there's still got to be a certain amount of face-to-face content when you come to the assessments and stuff like that. So they're working through that now.
Yeah, and Rich, I think that's a good point, because, I mean, look, the first lockdown, as with any business, we had to innovate and we had to adapt, and that meant putting a whole ton more stuff online, such as this. And certainly with our coach education, we've been wanting to move in that direction anyway. Not that you can do a capsized drill online, but certainly you can do some of the learning online. So that's definitely the way forward for us. So I think there's some real opportunities for us in the future about how we can be a bit more accessible as an organization and how our services can be a bit more accessible. That said, I think everyone on the call will accept that, you know, the sort of two-dimensional video call is really helpful, but it's not always a good substitute for face-to-face. So what we're trying to do at the moment is, if we fast forward and think, you know, let's work on the basis that we're going to be stuck in this cycle till the end of winter. We want to come out of winter into summer with a bit more adaptability in the way we operate, and with a really clear understanding of how we're going to service our members and our clubs and our competitions in the new way of working, whatever that is. And that's, I mean, I said it in one of my membership newsletters, it's a little bit like nailing jelly to the wall, but we're trying to wrestle with it and work out how we do that. So, and just the same as every other business out there, we're doing the same thing.
Cool. And I was trying to think of a segue to go from coach education to showers, but I think it's going to be next to impossible. So I'll just jump straight in there. Nick, when we're back able to open...
Showers?
Yeah, showers.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay,
showers,
right,
coach education.
Does Nick know a lot about showers, does he? Okay, that's good.
Nick has a surprising knowledge of guidance around showers. Yeah. So, assuming we're able to get back to the same sort of tier structure we were operating in previously, can you just clarify what the guidance was for showers in clubs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a bit of a struggle in the early days to try and get some clarification on it. I think at times it felt like we were going around in circles a little bit, but I mean, we did fight hard to try and get some better information out there. And assuming we go back down to pre this lockdown, then they are for essential use. That's the advice we're getting sent to us. And essential use is not well, I want it because I can have it. It's about showers and changing facilities for disabled, and it's about, if somebody's had a capsize, then they clearly need to shower. So it is minimal use at the moment. Yes, there are gym chains that have opened changing rooms and things, but hey, as we've all said on this, we do need to follow the guidance.
Yeah. And Paul, sort of connected from cleaning people to cleaning equipment. What is our current recommendation for cleaning boats and oars? We've had a question with saying, is it cleaning the whole boat? Is it just touch points? And equally, what would you use to clean? What materials would you use to clean them?
Okay. All I would say is that probably the entire rowing fleet of the country is probably the cleanest it's ever been in its entire existence. So my recommendation would be, you can't just clean the touch points, because actually, if you actually analyze where you touched the boat, you probably touched it in a multitude of places. So clean the thing from bow to stern, inside and out. Same with the blades as well, because you think, oh, well, I only touched the bit at the end. Well, no, you didn't, because you picked it up and put it down on hard or whatever you did. Just clean the whole lot. It's dead simple. Just, that's it. Warm soapy water, envelope, antibacterial spray if it's stuff inside, for gym equipment, as long as it does envelope virus or whatever. The recommendation doesn't change from what we had before, but just clean everything. Anything you touch, clean it.
That's fair. I think we may have just lost Andy for a minute. I hopefully he'll be back in 1 second. I think he may have had a connection issue. Nick, maybe if I come to you on this question. So we talked a bit about adaptive rowing, but we've also in our guidance we've only got a few little bits around fixed seat rowing. Can you just explain the logic behind that one as well?
Yeah, well, I think it's similar to what Andy said about the adaptive group, is that a lot of what we've got there is actually transferable across all forms of rowing. We're open to ideas from people within these communities, within different rowing communities that we serve, so that we can put extra guidance in there. But a lot of it is very transferable. And again, if people do, now we've lost Paul. And if anybody has got feedback, I think please do, put it through to club support, and we'll look at it.
Cool. Sorry, Nick, I'm going to have to come to you with another question, because unfortunately we've lost 2 panelists. So I just want to talk about schools activity, if we can, because I know that's an area that some people have got. Paul is just back, yeah. I think.
Sorry, don't know what happened there.
Brilliant.
I did the usual IT thing. Turn it on, turn it off again.
Great. Well, look, you've just saved Nick there from a question which I know that you know the answer to. as I was saying, there's been quite a lot of confusion around particularly schools activity and what is and isn't allowed, and how that relates to also junior activity in clubs. Can you just kind of set out the what the guidance is around that?
Okay, this is complicated, so people please bear with me. It's never easy when you're dealing with government and advice from government. So curriculum activity at school can, for physical education, PE, games, whatever you want to call it, is allowed as long as it's part of curricular activity. So if that means that you can go rowing at your boat club, if you're lucky enough to have your own boathouse, or you can go to the facility that you normally use as long as it's open. That is down to the landlord or whoever runs that facility. So although you might be able to go rowing under the guidance, if your facility is shut, then you can't. And that is down to, as I say, the landlord or whoever has done their risk assessment and deemed that it's not safe. That is done for schools because they are working in the principle that schools operate in bubbles, so in year bubbles or class bubbles or whatever the bubble that school operates in. So that's why school sport is allowed. Extracurricular activity, which we touched on earlier, wasn't originally allowed, is now allowed, but it has to be around childcare, which means that you're dropping your child off at a before school club so you can go to work. So, you know, there's an after school club so you can pick them up after you finish work. So it's not around extracurricular activity as in for anything else other than around childcare. Okay, so we now move on to juniors in clubs. The reason there is no junior rowing in clubs, similar to the reason why there's no adult rowing in clubs, in a sense that you are mixing with groups of people that are not in your bubble. It's as simple as that. So, you know, you could have, in a junior club, you could have a squad of 10, and that squad of 10 could be from 10 different schools.
Yeah.
Now, don't ask me the logic behind it, bearing in mind that those 10 people could actually meet somewhere else or whatever, or they're mixing outside of school or whatever. Don't ask me to explain the logic, but that is the guidance.
Okay. And Paul, just to clarify as well, we've had a question around if you've got a school that rows out of your club, even if the club is closed for normal club activity, can the school potentially still use the club?
The school can use the club as long as they have the permission, and there is a very clear line in the guidance for education and childcare, which came out on the 5th of November, that says that the school and the club are happy with the protocols of both organisations. But as I said before, if you've got a rowing club that has a school rowing out of it and they deem that you can't row, you can't row unless it's written in your lease agreement, your agreement or whatever with that club. So you have to abide by the owners of the premises or the people who run the premises.
Cool. And Andy, I think we've got you back now. Hopefully you can hear me. I know you covered this off a little bit at the start of the webinar. We've had some further questions on it. In terms of private skulls that are stored on club facilities, can you just explain why our guidance is that the clubs and all the facilities are closed, including those whether outdoor racks or indoor racks? Cool. I think we'll just...
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, you're good.
I thought I was going to get muted for the thorny question of single skulls, which would have been quite beneficial, actually. Sorry about that. Except my laptop decided to die. Single skulls, yeah. Look, I mean, I guess in the first lockdown, there was the thorny issue of single skulls. Could you take them out? Could you access them? Where could you access them from? But I guess part of that was prevented by the closure of the waterways. With respect to this lockdown, while you can access the waterways, and if you have a private boat, either single or a double with a same household or social bubbles, you can access it. But the rationale around you can't access it from your boat club, from your rowing club, is that they're closed. So I mean, our interpretation of that was that closed means closed, and that was the real message we got from indirectly from government on that Monday night was, look, you can start looking for loopholes and exemptions, but they really didn't want to go down that route, because once you start to open it up, then there's loopholes and exemptions for everything. Now, some of you listening may argue that that's exactly what has happened, but from our perspective, what we didn't want to do was issue guidance that encouraged that. We wanted to give sound, measured guidance that we thought reflected what the government wanted to achieve, and then ultimately it's up to clubs' responsibility to adhere to that or not, basically.
Cool. Well, hopefully that covers that for everybody. Nick, as a competition organizer, I think it's probably a good question to pose to you. I've got a club asking if they are planning to run a competition after the 2nd of December. What would your advice be at this stage? Let's assume it's probably in the few weeks after to start with.
I think I would encourage any competition organizer or anybody who wants to organize competition to think about it carefully, go through our existing guidance, because there's some good key points there, and look at how you can plan it so that you've not got, or you're minimizing your spend prior to the event. I'd hate for clubs or events to go and commit their finances and then find that they would need to shelve it because of new restrictions or whatever. But I would completely encourage people, if you can do it, if you can plan it, as some events already had been doing, to be COVID secure, and you've got the will and the want to do it, go for it, because we are going to come out of this at some point. We're coming out of it completely different to what we all thought when we went into this. I think we thought we were going to lose a bit of the regatta season, and certainly not, all of the regatta season and a large portion of the head season. So yeah, we need to get people out there enjoying our sport.
And Nick, wouldn't it also be fair to say that we need to be thinking differently in our competitions, because we can't immediately go back to full scale, I don't know, multi-lane or big events. We've got to start small. We've got to be adaptable, and I think that's got to be the way for us to approach this next phase, so that we just build confidence. Is that the take you've got?
I totally agree with that. I think, yeah, we've got to be innovative, and I think that we were starting to see some events being innovative as well. It's not nice that some people feel that things are a little bit regionalized, but actually I think that is the way that to come out of these next few months that we've got to be looking at in order to get people racing again. So there were some good ideas out there coming about, and I think it was good, and that needs to be encouraged.
I'd say that one other thing I'd add to that is that, having spoken to some competition organisers who hadn't actually ever engaged with like the local authorities before, because they haven't had to, have engaged with their local authorities and have turned around and had what might seem a really difficult conversation in a sense, they feared that their event would be cancelled, but actually have educated their local authorities, and the local authorities have come back to them and gone, do you know what? We didn't know how well you were going to do something. We didn't appreciate how well you had organised this. And I know this won't be any surprise to any event organiser, because I know how much effort everybody puts into it. But until you have what you think is going to be a difficult conversation with somebody who could possibly shut your event down, then you don't realize they don't realise how well we run events. So don't be put off by having that difficult conversation, because educating your local authority or whatever is going to be a real bonus in the future.
And I think it's also key. I think it's also key just to say, to reiterate again, you know, start those conversations as early as possible, because the local authorities' workload has gone through the roof, just like, you know, event organisers' workload has. But start those conversations early. We certainly found that was key for the test event, and you know, it paid dividends in the end.
We just had one question in, which I actually don't think anybody on this panel is probably in a position to answer, because it relates very specifically to trials for Coxes for the GB rowing team. So what I would recommend in answer to that question is, if you email, we've got an email address which is gbrt, as in GB rowing team, .trials@britishrowing.org. And if you emailed your question there, then I'm sure they'll be able to provide you an answer on that one. Sorry not to be able to do that on here.
I mean,
but I'm sure there are.
Fair, I mean, what we're doing with the team at the moment is we're going through the selection policy for Tokyo 21, because I mean, the selection policy we had essentially came to its conclusion in 2020. So we've just gone through a big exercise talking to the athletes, the coaches, and we should have a selection policy sorted pretty soon. And I guess underpinning that is going to be what the whole strategy for the next season looks like, which, look, it's been a lot of work trying to work out how we deal with a delayed Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I'm sure there'll be some information coming out soon on what the trial setup looks like.
Brilliant. And just to close tonight, and I'm sorry, I know there's a few questions that we perhaps haven't got to, but I just wanted to finish on one final question to each of the panel. Clearly this year has been really tricky, but we've kind of touched on it a little bit already. I just wanted to ask each of you if there's like one positive you'd take from this period, what would it be? Nick, if I come to you first.
Gee, thanks. I think I'd probably say well, I was going to say the volunteer community pulling together, but actually I think it's the whole rowing family pulling together. And, you know, yes, there's been quite a few discussions and phone calls and emails and everything around, but everybody, to use the pun, everybody's in the same boat. And I think generally everybody's been working really well together, you know, and that's across all levels of our sport, and especially within our clubs, to get members out there doing things. And I'll just say, please keep doing it.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Yeah.
That's it. Go on, Paul.
I was going to nick this one only because I know what I feel like when I ask my crew to turn around and give me a good thing and a bad thing for the outing. All I would say is the innovation of the clubs, and you know, how the clubs, sort of what Nick was saying, how they've managed to keep engaged with their members, keeping their clubs together through something that we've never been through before, and all the rest of it. The club's innovation, the coaches that are out there that have jumped onto Zoom sessions, the whole lot. It's quite amazing what they've done, and you know, they should be immensely proud of how they've kept their clubs together.
Yeah, it has been pretty incredible how clubs have pulled together during this time. Andy, is there anything you want to add?
Well, I definitely echo what Nick and Paul have said. I mean, in our COVID meetings now, we have Scottish rowing, Welsh rowing, we have Nick as chair of the sport committee, we have Kate as deputy chair looking after the regional chair forum. I think that the communication, collaboration and teamwork that we've seen throughout this period has been brilliant. Brilliant. I really do. And I'm with Paul in terms of the creativity and the way that we as a sporters have adapted. If I was to pick one positive, and I could actually point to a whole ton of really good things that have happened to our organisation in quite extreme circumstances, and the sports responded brilliantly, is the real positive is we're still here, because there's a lot of sports who are in serious trouble right now. The professional sports are really suffering because they're reliant on ticketing and media rights value. We're still here in that respect. The indoor sports are really struggling because they have nothing. They have had absolutely nothing all year. I mean, the WhatsApp group I'm on is talking about, you know, mass redundancies, membership tanking, people not doing their sport. And I look out at our sport and I think, do you know what? The membership's pretty resilient. The clubs are doing a brilliant job. People are complying with what's going on, and there's definitely a future for us. And that, I'm afraid, is a real positive right now in a tough economic environment that's going to hit us. And who knows what the winter's going to hold. So I think we should take that as a real positive. And that, to me, suggests that even if we get a lockdown 3 and a lockdown 4 through the winter, hey, we can deal with it. We can deal with it again, and we can deal with it better, and we can come out of this in a really strong position.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for tonight. But thank you very much for everyone for joining us, and a massive thank you to all the panel, Andy, Nick, Paul. We tried to get through as many questions as we could, but I'm sure there's a few that we haven't managed to get to tonight. So if you still do have a question that hasn't been answered, Paul's team does still remain there. If you email clubsupport@britishrowing.org. Please do keep an eye out on all our social channels. We're trying to get some really good content out there for lockdown, whether it's the Rowers Lockdown Challenge on the front page of the website at the moment, the daily workouts that are putting out onto our social channels as well, and British Rowing Plus, of course. We also have Brick Online coming up at the start of December, so not long to get your entries in for that. Should be a really great virtual competition, that, so please do check that out and encourage your club members to take part. Finally, a massive thank you to you and all the rowing volunteers across the country. We know it's been such a tricky and I think it's fair to say that we might not always show it, but we know that all the members around the country really do appreciate everything you guys are doing for rowing as well. So thanks very much for that. Have a great evening and stay safe.
Thanks all.
See you, everybody.